Hey, welcome back everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you from the eGen Lounge. We're here in Mandalay Bay at the House of Blues. It's Google Cloud Next, 25,000 people talking nothing but agentic AI. And we're excited to have somebody who's kind of down in the trenches, working with customers, working with Google to make this reality happen for customers. And he's Duco van Amstel. He's the principal engineer for eGen. Duco, great to see you.
Well, nice to meet you, Jeff.
Thank you. So they tell me you are the specialist in regulated industries. So what's special about regulated industries from kind of an implementation point of view?
Well, it involves a much higher level of best practices. Like, everybody wants to follow best practices, but it's literally a regulatory requirement to follow them in this case.
Right.
So what comes out of that means, well, it's not just the best, nice to have, it is a mandatory, we need to be able to certify that whatever we have in that setup that they provide from an infrastructure perspective, that it actually complies and it adheres to all these points so that a proper audit can be actually made and they can be certified to be compliant with whatever standard they are seeking to get to.
It's interesting getting ready for this. I'd never heard of HITRUST before. Of course, I've heard of HIPAA a ton in healthcare, and I thought it was a really interesting framework where HIPAA is the law, but HITRUST is the audit that actually helps you put it in place. So that's a little different standard than just saying this is what you're supposed to do when you actually have to get certified and validated that you did it.
Yeah, that's true. What interesting thing about HITRUST I find is that it's more a framework. It's that not as in rule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's that you need to make sure that you have the places and the way to audit that you certify with all these written requirements that you could have in HIPAA, SOX compliance, and others. And so it's about that framework thinking that actually makes it an interesting challenge to meet the HITRUST compliance in this case.
But you got a bar to hit, right? You got a pretty clear bar that you got to hit.
Of course, and that's one of my specialties, I would say, is in this case is about creating those building blocks. Right, just before this, I was actually talking to a customer about that. It's not about, well, we're going to build these systems, 20 different systems, and for each one of them, we're going to find out how to be compliant with the framework, how to reach those audit points. It's rather, you create the building blocks that by design are compliant with these points that HITRUST requires, and then you make sure that you build your entire platform, your applications, your databases, that they adhere and use those building blocks. Because at that point, auditing is pretty simple, is you make sure that all the building blocks are compliant, and then you make sure that everything you build uses the building blocks. It's a two-step process. The auditors we've worked with in that process, they love it. It's easy, it's much cheaper, much less effort, and it is extensible.
And how much of their old and existing stuff can you pull over and then recreate in some of these new tools, or is it kind of starting from scratch and then making sure they're compliant?
I'm going to say there's always going to be a little bit of a component of making things custom, depending on because of the regulations. Everybody has, in the past, had their own way of making things compliant. Sometimes they're already pretty cookie cutter, if I could say it that way, of how they achieve it. Otherwise, it's more like, well, we've just built this new platform and we had to do everything from scratch. So it's more about defining what the target environment is that we build up for the customer and make sure that that isn't compliant. And it's about making sure that you have another building block, which is actually the migration path. The migration path itself is a building block in that matter, and that preserves the auditability of everything was compliant before, everything moved to a compliant state, and the way it was moved remained compliant with everything is, especially around data integrity.
So what are some of the biggest roadblocks that you run into typically that you just know are going to be there that everybody has, and we just got to get past it?
I think it's a number of layers that come into making sure that we are in compliance with these regulations. For example, it's not just, okay, my database has some RBAC, IAM permissions around it to make sure that we know who is connecting to it, etc. There are other controls about data residency. For example, this data should not be moving out of the US or outside of Europe to be compliant with these things. So that is where you have something like VPC service controls in Google, which is the standard tool to achieve these things. It's also making sure, not just by somebody granting or not granting access to it, is nobody, even if you grant access from silo A, business unit A, into getting access to a database in business silo B, even if you grant the access, it will still not be possible because you put a firewall, not a network firewall, but literally an API firewall. The calls cannot be made between the two environments. And that is one of the main tools that Google provides, in this case, VPC service controls, to achieve that level. And it adds a lot of complexity for the security team, for the cloud engineering team, to make sure that it is done in a, again, repeatable building block style way.
Right. So you just talked about a piece of it that Google provides. What if you can be a little bit broader in terms of what Gemini and the power of Gemini put in your pocket when you're with the customers does for you?
So for me, Gemini it's a partner. I bring in my wide range of expertise, my past experiences, my knowledge, and I know about the building blocks, or at least what they should look like. But then again, this is what I said, you need to sometimes customize it a little bit to suit the specific requirements that the customer might say, because of business requirements, not just regulatory ones. And this is where I say, well, okay, I would take this building block, this is how I build it, I would modify it this way, and I'll ask Gemini, what am I missing here? In this case, and it brings me ideas. So I'm like, oh, you're good, you seem to be on track. And it's like, are you sure? I have doubts about this area. And we'll investigate. It's like, no, I think you're good. So it's not about, well, let's say, outsourcing my knowledge in this case. It's more about sanity checking and broadening my horizon, because maybe sometimes I've already seen it comes up with ideas that I've known about, but had just dropped out of my memory because it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it reminds me, oh yeah, that's a great catch. I should do it that way. I should feel if I can integrate it that way, if it fits. And so it's a dialogue in that sense, like a partner with experience, access to a wealth of knowledge.
So what are some of the factors that are going to increase the probability of success on an engagement and making sure that what you guys put in is going to be adopted and widely used by the customer versus the things that, if these are in the way, the chances of successfully migrating from some little project to scale is less confident?
I'd say consensus and wide buy-in across the organization. You can come in, you can work with what they design. The VP says, we need to be high trust compliant. Brings us in, it's like, well, here's your cloud engineering team, talk to them, build it out. I was like, well, okay, first, let me talk to the networking team, because there's networking aspects to it. Let me talk to the security team, because hey, they are going to be the key guardians of this being compliant. So it's not about talking just to one team, it's making sure that everybody's on the same page where we want to go. And that's like one of my key roles as an architect when I come in, is I make sure that we talk about that, because frankly, some customers, because of their initial traditional ways of working, how they've always been successful is, well, you should be working with this team because they know what they're doing, because the stakeholder might be less technical, and they say, well, this is a cloud matter, so you should talk to the cloud team. It's like, no, it's a matter, compliance is a cross-organization requirement, and it's making sure that you have that whole organization that is on the same page.
So outside of compliance specifically that we've been talking about, the HIPAA, and the high trust, in terms of who owns it, right? 10 years ago when all the talk was Hadoop and data, right? Is there a chief data officer? How do you manage and orchestrate something that should be kind of across the entire organization, but somebody's got to own it, somebody's got to drive it? How are you seeing the successful organizations kind of organize their internal push to do a lot more AI internally?
I would say ownership in this case is the key word, making sure that every piece of the puzzle, which I help them build out, and organizations need to figure out before they start moving, because you shouldn't just start implementing and figure things out along the road.
Right.
There is some planning, and that's when you need to define ownership. This part of the problem that we're solving for compliance, this lies with the security team, this one lies with the data team, and make sure that there are no gaps in between. So you have a full coverage, but for every single topic, you have somebody you can talk to. Like, you're the owner of this. Doesn't mean that you have to do everything, but you need to make sure that your team and everybody that touches upon it from outside your team is aligned on the direction that we're going. And those owners together then form kind of a council, for lack of a better word, that can actually achieve together and make sure that the whole as a business, you're moving and aligning in the right direction.
And who are those people kind of often in terms of titles? Where do they come from that make up that group of people that are driving the change? Is it CIOs, CTOs? Is it department level people? Is it business unit level? Where's really the most effective way to drive that change?
It varies depending on which part of the business you're looking at. If we look, for example, at app development, I would typically see these are the heads of their departments in this case. They might obviously delegate to some of their reports in this case because of the requirements of specific applications that will come into play. When you think more about some what we call central functions around cloud engineering, platform support, what various titles that exist, in this case it will be really the technical leads for the individual teams. These are smaller silos, but because of their centrality, they have a much larger impact and ability to influence the success or lack of success of such a transformation.
Okay. So we've been at this for a while. What's still the biggest myth that's out there that you run into that people are still kind of confused about? This whole AI, I guess we don't call it Gen AI. We went from AI to Gen AI, I guess we're back to AI now. But what is the biggest myth that they still have that gets in the way of your progress with them?
I wouldn't say I would call it a myth, but a story I encounter quite regularly with engineering leaders or business leaders to say, well, AI, it's a game changer. It's a whole new paradigm that we're getting into. I do not fundamentally dispute that. What I do think is, it doesn't mean that we have to rethink everything from scratch. We should be building on a very solid base of long existing best practices and foundations and just adapt them for the AI. AI is an additional layer of abstraction on top of what we already have, and therefore you cannot ignore what came before. That's what I would say. It's not as in it's a blank slate. That's not the case. It's just another tool, great tool, transformative tool, that's another tool that we need to incorporate, just like we, for example, in the past, we started integrating CI/CD in our practices that we talked 20, 30 years ago. Like that also, that was another layer of automation on top of the manual labor we were doing before. This is another layer of automation on top of that. So it's the same process, we just need to make it fit into our thought framework in that regard.
Okay, so you get to see a lot of cool stuff, you get to see a lot of cool projects and visions of projects. If we're sitting here a year from today, what are you excited about that we're going to see change over the next 12 months, 18 months? From your point of view, and what are we going to be talking about in 12 months, do you think?
Well, I'd say, if I could say what I hope we'd be talking about,
that works.
Especially when it comes to highly regulated industries, it's that the existing Gemini Enterprise capabilities that Google has already been bringing and has been announcing as we're a part of Google Cloud Next, I would hope that we can think more about the security layer behind it, the one that I particularly care about. And which means is that we now get the auditable points of control, so it's not just by default, it's going to be secure. It's not that, well, we can use Gemini Enterprise, but now you have to figure one way or another via custom agents or custom tooling to, outside of Gemini Enterprise, control whether things are following the right paths to remain auditable and secure. Instead, I want that to be kind of hopefully built into Gemini Enterprise.
It's kind of tricky though, right? Don't they always say never use the same tool in production, the same tool to test that you use in production?
That's quite true, but in this case, I'm throwing down the gauntlet for Google, and I know they're great engineers, so I'm pretty sure some of them will be able to come up with a solution here.
It'll be like the anti-Google Google inside of Google, right? The opposition. Well, the Air Force does it all the time, right? Somebody's got to fly the other jets for training.
Exactly, and for me, it's not adversarial. It's just like, let's go for the challenge. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Duco, thanks for sharing your insights, being out there in the front lines. It's great to hear what's actually happening.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, he's Duco, I'm Jeff. We're at the Aegean Lounge here at Mandalay Bay at Google Cloud Next. We'll be here for a little while longer. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Take care.